When people hear there is a new certification, they often imagine it is just another test with a new name. But a good certification is really a map of what a beginner should be able to understand and explain. That map is the blueprint. And for CompTIA Security OT plus SOT-001, the blueprint is not just paperwork, it is the clearest signal of what the exam is trying to measure. Think of it as a contract between you and the exam. It tells you what topics exist, how they are grouped, and what kind of thinking you will be asked to do. A brand new learner can feel overwhelmed because operational technology sounds huge, but the blueprint narrows it into a defined set of learning targets. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to read that map like someone who knows where the shortcuts and dead ends are, so your studying feels intentional instead of anxious. By the end, you should be able to look at any exam objective and know what it expects you to recognize, explain, and apply. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A blueprint is usually organized into domains, and domains are simply major themes that the exam writers use to keep coverage balanced. The key beginner mistake is treating domains like separate islands, because real OT security concepts overlap constantly. A domain might talk about safety, but safety connects to access control, and access control connects to network design, and network design connects to incident response. When you decode the blueprint, you are not only seeing a list of topics, you are seeing how the exam expects you to connect ideas. Another important detail is that the blueprint typically includes weights, meaning some domains appear more often than others. That is not a trick, it is a signal about emphasis, and it should shape how you allocate attention over time. You do not have to memorize the percentages as trivia, but you should respect them as a guide for where the exam lives most of the time. When you study, your goal is to build confidence in the most common themes first, then fill in the smaller areas so you are not surprised. Inside each domain, you usually see objectives that are written as short, action-oriented statements, and those verbs are doing more work than beginners realize. Words like identify, recognize, distinguish, compare, or explain suggest a different level of depth than words like implement or configure. Security OT Plus is aimed at testing understanding and sound judgment, not whether you can type commands or build a network from scratch in the moment. If an objective says you should be able to distinguish two concepts, that means you must understand what makes them different, where each one belongs, and what can go wrong if you confuse them. If an objective says you should be able to recognize something, that means you may be shown a description, a symptom, a diagram-like scenario in words, or a short set of facts, and you must know what it is pointing to. When you decode the blueprint, practice turning each objective into a plain English question you could ask yourself, because that helps you stop reading the words like a checklist and start hearing them like test prompts. This also keeps you from overstudying, because you will avoid drifting into deep implementation details that the exam is not designed to reward. Another piece of decoding is understanding what CompTIA is trying to measure with this specific certification. Security OT Plus is not a pure IT security exam, and it is not a pure engineering exam either, so the blueprint tends to live in the overlap where operational constraints and security needs collide. That means the exam often rewards practical reasoning, like choosing actions that reduce risk without breaking the process, or identifying why a classic IT approach might be risky in a planned environment. A beginner should treat that as a mindset shift, not just a new vocabulary list. In OT, availability and safety often have a different priority than in office IT, and the exam will reflect that through the way questions are framed. You might be asked to decide what to do first when time matters, or what communication step is safest, or which mitigation preserves operations while still reducing exposure. If you keep the blueprint in front of you as a map of that overlap, you will study toward the way the exam thinks, not just the way a textbook organizes information. Scoring is another area that feels mysterious until you treat it like a system with boundaries. CompTIA exams commonly use scaled scoring, which means you see a score on a fixed scale rather than a raw percentage. For a learner, the important takeaway is that the exam is designed to be consistent across versions, even if one version feels a little harder than another. Scaled scoring supports that goal by smoothing differences between question sets so that passing means the same thing no matter which set you get. You do not need to do math during the exam or guess how many you can miss, because the test is not built for that kind of game. Instead, you should understand that every question is an opportunity to gain points, and your best strategy is to stay accurate and steady rather than chasing a perfect score. Also, some exams include a mix of question types that may not all be weighted exactly the same in a way you can predict, so focusing on performance is better than focusing on counting. The healthiest mental approach is to treat the score as the output of your decisions, not something you can micromanage with guessing tricks. Policies can sound boring, but they are part of decoding the exam experience because they shape what happens before, during, and after you test. Exam policies include what you are allowed to bring, how identity verification works, what breaks are permitted, and what behaviors can end the exam. For a beginner, the point is not to memorize legal language. It is to remove uncertainty so your brain can focus on questions instead of logistics. If you test online, policies around workspace, cameras, and allowed materials matter because the environment is part of the security of the exam. If you test in a center, policies around check-in time, lockers, and what happens if you arrive late matter because they affect your stress level. Another policy concept worth understanding is that vendors sometimes include unscored questions used for research, which means you might see an item that feels odd or unusually hard. The correct reaction is not panic, but composure, because you still answer it the best you can and move on. Policies exist, so the exam result means something, and treating them as part of preparation helps you show up calm and ready. Now let's talk about question styles, because the blueprint tells you topics, but question styles tell you how those topics will be tested. Many CompTIA exams use multiple choice items, but the exam experience is not always limited to simple recall. The common beginner fear is that questions will require obscure facts, yet the more common challenge is interpretation under time pressure. A question might describe a scenario in a few sentences and ask what is most likely, what is best, or what should be done first. Those words matter because most likely is about probability based on clues, while best is about choosing the option that aligns with priorities and constraints. What should be done first is about sequencing and risk, not about what is most impressive. You will also see distractors, which are answer choices designed to be tempting if you only understand the topic halfway. Decoding question styles means learning to spot what the question is truly asking, and then matching your choice to that specific ask. Performance-based questions are another style you should expect in the CompTIA world, even though they do not require you to actually configure real systems like you would in a lab. A performance-based item might ask you to categorize things, match concepts, order steps, interpret a small set of information, or choose correct actions in a constrained scenario. The goal is to see if you can apply understanding rather than repeat a definition. For an OT-focused exam, that might look like identifying where a control belongs in an environment, recognizing which action creates an operational risk, or choosing the safest next step given constraints like uptime or safety rules. Beginners sometimes freeze because the format feels different, but the thinking is the same. Read carefully, identify what the task is asking you to do, and use the blueprint concepts to guide your choices. You should also expect that these items may feel longer, so part of preparation is building patience and avoiding the urge to rush. If you treat them like puzzles that reward calm reasoning, they become less intimidating. There are also why questions and difference questions hidden inside normal multiple-choice formats. A why question tests cause and effect, like why a certain control is risky in OT, or why a certain network design choice changes exposure. A difference question tests boundaries, like the difference between IT and OT priorities, or the difference between safety and security impacts, or the difference between monitoring and blocking. These are exactly the kinds of questions the blueprint verbs hint at, and they are where beginners often lose points because they study definitions without learning contrast. One powerful way to decode these questions is to train yourself to answer in a full sentence before looking at options. If you can say, in your own words, what the right answer should accomplish, you are less likely to be tricked by a distractor that sounds correct but misses the core requirement. Also pay attention to qualifiers like always, never, only, or completely, because those extreme words are often used in wrong answers in security exams. Real security decisions are rarely absolute, and OT decisions are especially shaped by context. Another important feature of CompTIA-style questions is that they frequently reward prioritization and risk-based thinking. That means you might have multiple answers that are technically helpful, but only one that is the best given the situation. For example, one option might improve security a lot, but create downtime risk, while another option improves security moderately, but keeps operations stable. The blueprint is pointing you toward a professional mindset where you balance outcomes rather than chase perfection. In OT, this balancing act is even more pronounced because physical processes and safety are involved, so best often means safest and least disruptive, not most aggressive. When you decode the exam, you should expect questions that test whether you respect those constraints. The correct choice is often the one that reduces risk while maintaining control of the process, especially in a beginner-level view where the exam wants you to recognize smart, conservative actions. This is why reading the full question slowly can be more valuable than reading the options quickly. Time management is not listed as an objective, but it is connected to question styles because different items take different amounts of thinking. Multiple-choice questions can often be answered quickly if you understand the concept and the wording, but scenario-style questions can take longer because you must identify relevant clues. Performance-based items can take longer because you must complete a task rather than pick a letter. The blueprint helps you here because it tells you what concepts are likely to show up repeatedly, and those repeated concepts are where speed comes from. When you are confident in core themes, you answer faster and save time for the hard items. A useful beginner mental habit is to separate confusion about the topic from confusion about the wording. If you understand the topic but the wording feels dense, slow down and restate the question in plain language in your head. If you do not understand the topic, make your best choice. Mark it mentally if your testing interface supports review, and move on so you do not sink the entire exam into one struggle. Confidence grows when you practice letting go of perfection and focusing on steady progress. Let's also clear up a common misconception about decoding the blueprint. You do not beat the exam by memorizing the blueprint lines. The blueprint is not a secret key. It is a guide that tells you what kinds of knowledge the exam expects. Your real job is to build durable understanding so that any question phrased in any reasonable way still makes sense to you. If you only memorize surface terms, the exam will feel like it is trying to trick you, when in reality it is asking you to reason from fundamentals. Beginners often try to collect facts like trading cards, but security exams are more like driving tests, where knowing definitions matters, yet you also need situational judgment. In OT, that judgment includes understanding that systems can be old, uptime matters, changes can have unintended consequences, and safety and security are intertwined. When you study with the blueprint, aim for comprehension that survives rewording, because the exam is designed to vary phrasing and still measure the same underlying competency. That mindset reduces anxiety because you stop depending on exact word matches. Another misconception is believing that every question is a standalone trivia item with no connection to the rest of the exam. In reality, many items pull from the same foundational ideas, just viewed from different angles. A question about policies might quietly test your understanding of integrity and fairness, while a question about OT constraints might quietly test your understanding of risk management and prioritization. When you decode the blueprint, notice repeated themes like safety, availability, segmentation, monitoring, change control, and incident handling, because those themes are like the backbone of the exam. If you can explain each theme in your own words and give a simple example, you are building the kind of understanding that transfers across questions. This also helps with confidence, because you will recognize that you have seen the underlying idea before, even if the surface details are new. The exam becomes less like a surprise and more like a series of familiar decisions. That feeling is what people mean when they say they are prepared. As you get closer to test day, decoding the blueprint becomes less about what to learn and more about what to review. You can use the blueprint as a checklist to make sure you are not ignoring an entire area, but you should not use it as a last-minute cram script. The most effective late-stage use is to scan each objective and ask yourself whether you could explain it to a friend in 2 minutes without looking anything up. If you can, you are probably fine. If you cannot, that objective is a weak spot, and you should revisit the concept at a high level until it feels coherent. This approach is especially useful for beginners because it turns preparation into clarity rather than panic. Policies and question styles should also be part of this late-stage review because knowing what will happen and what questions will feel like reduces stress. Stress does not just make you feel bad, it steals working memory, which is the mental space you need to parse questions and hold details while comparing answers. Reducing stress is a learning strategy, not a motivational slogan. To wrap this up, the blueprint, scoring model, policies, and question styles are not side details. They are the frame around everything you will learn for security OT plus SOT-001. The blueprint tells you what the exam is about, and decoding it means understanding domains, weights, and the verbs that signal depth. Scoring reminds you to focus on consistent accuracy rather than guessing games, and policies remove uncertainty that would otherwise drain attention on test day. Question styles teach you how the exam asks for knowledge, which is often through scenarios, prioritization, and careful wording rather than pure recall. When you put these together, you stop studying like you are lost in a big field and start studying like you have a map, a compass, and a sense of what the finish line looks like. That shift matters for brand new learners because confidence is built from predictability, and predictability comes from understanding the rules of the game. Your next step is to keep that map in mind as you learn the actual OT security concepts, because every concept will land more cleanly when you know why it belongs and how it is likely to be tested.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.